The moment a Chinese Coast Guard vessel slammed into an anchored Philippine government ship off a remote island chain in the South China Sea, something shifted permanently. This was not a near miss. This was not a drill. And this was not the first time. But what made this particular incident different from every confrontation that came before it was what happened in the minutes, hours, and days that followed, and who was already positioned in those waters, watching every move through satellite feeds and naval radar systems that Beijing had no idea were already locked on. The South China Sea has long been described by strategists as the most dangerous body of water on the planet. Not because of the storms that barrel across it every typhoon season. Not because of the shipping lanes that carry over $5 trillion in global trade every single year. But because of what nations are willing to do to control it, and what they are willing to risk if they do not. When Chinese vessels began clustering around a sandbar called Sandy Cay, just a few nautical miles from a Philippine-controlled island called Thitu, most international observers knew it was only a matter of time before a spark flew. The Philippines had been quietly upgrading its military outpost on Thitu Island for years, a move that China had been watching with growing frustration. And in the early days of October 2025, that frustration turned into direct physical confrontation on the open water. What unfolded on October 12 was captured on video and broadcast around the world within hours. A Chinese Coast Guard ship rammed a Philippine Bureau of Fisheries vessel that was anchored in waters the international community, backed by a permanent court ruling in The Hague in 2016, had already recognized as falling within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. That ruling, delivered 9 years earlier, had explicitly rejected China's sprawling territorial claims across the South China Sea. Beijing had ignored it then. And it was ignoring it again now. The impact of the ramming shook the vessel's crew. Water cannons followed. 2 other nearby Philippine government ships were hit with high-pressure jets of water, damaging equipment and scattering crew members across rain-slicked decks. Manila condemned the actions immediately, calling them reckless and coercive. Washington did not wait long to respond either. The United States Department of State issued a formal condemnation within 24 hours, reminding Beijing in unusually direct language that the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and the Philippines extended to armed attacks on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft anywhere in the South China Sea. That statement was not just diplomatic language. It was a warning. And it was backed up by something Beijing already knew was in the water. Because weeks earlier, joint naval exercises between the United States, the Philippines, Japan, Canada, and France had taken place in the very same region. From October 13 through October 17, those 5 nations sent warships and military aircraft into the South China Sea in a coordinated display of alliance strength that no single participating nation could have staged alone. The timing was not coincidental. The message was intentional. And China's response to that message, the ramming, the water cannons, the escalating patrols, told the world everything it needed to know about where this situation was heading. To understand how the South China Sea reached this boiling point in 2025, you have to go back even further. The roots of the current crisis stretch across decades, but the acceleration began in earnest in the early 2010s when China began constructing artificial islands on top of reefs and submerged features in the Spratly Islands. These structures, built on dredged sand and reinforced with concrete, were outfitted with airstrips, radar installations, missile batteries, and port facilities. They were not villages. They were not scientific research stations. They were military outposts, positioned to extend China's reach across a sea it had declared, through a dotted line on a map first drawn in 1947, to be essentially its own. That 9-dash line, which in 2023 was updated to a 10-dash line with an additional mark off the coast of Taiwan, encompasses roughly 85 to 90% of the South China Sea. Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Taiwan, and the Philippines all have overlapping claims in the region. None of them except the 9-dash line. The International Court in The Hague ruled it had no basis under international law. And yet China continues to enforce it through the one instrument it has found most effective for doing so without triggering a formal declaration of conflict, the Coast Guard. The China Coast Guard is not a civilian law enforcement body in any traditional sense. It operates under the direction of the Central Military Commission, is equipped with some of the largest Coast Guard vessels ever built, and has been given legal authority under Chinese domestic law passed in 2021 to use weapons against foreign vessels operating in waters China claims as its own. That 2021 law alarmed neighboring countries and drew condemnation from international legal experts, but Beijing pressed ahead. And the Coast Guard fleet grew. By 2025 it had become, by tonnage and vessel count, one of the most powerful maritime forces in the world. The consequences of this expansion became visible at Scarborough Shoal long before October. On August 11, 2025, something extraordinary happened at that location that Beijing worked extremely hard to keep quiet. Two Chinese vessels, a Navy destroyer called Guilin 164 and a Coast Guard cutter, collided with each other during a high-speed attempt to intercept a Philippine Coast Guard vessel operating lawfully near the shoal. The collision was severe enough to crush the bow of the Coast Guard ship. Satellite imagery provided to Reuters by Maxar Technologies later showed the damaged vessel being towed to a dry dock at the Yulin Naval Base near the city of Sanya on Hainan Island. At least 2 Chinese Coast Guard personnel were believed to have died in the incident. Beijing said nothing publicly about casualties. It said nothing about the collision at all, except to accuse Philippine vessels of conducting dangerous maneuvers in Chinese waters. What that incident revealed was something that had not been widely understood before. China was now deploying naval destroyers, frontline warships, to back up Coast Guard operations at disputed features. This was an escalation in kind. Previously, Beijing had relied on Coast Guard vessels and what analysts call maritime militia ships, fishing boats crewed by personnel with ties to the Chinese military, to harass and pressure other nations' vessels. Bringing a destroyer into the equation changed the calculus entirely. It meant that ordinary maritime confrontations were now occurring in proximity to weapon systems capable of engaging other warships in open combat. Manila was not the only one watching. Washington was watching too. Less than 2 days after the August 11 collision, the USS Higgins, a United States Navy destroyer, was operating near Scarborough Shoal. Beijing claimed it had expelled the vessel from what it called Chinese territorial waters. The U.S. Navy disputed this characterization entirely, stating the ship was conducting a lawful freedom of navigation operation in international waters. That exchange of claims and counterclaims had become almost routine by 2025, but the presence of a U.S. destroyer at Scarborough Shoal in the direct aftermath of a Chinese naval collision carried a clear and deliberate signal. The Philippines responded to the escalating pressure at Scarborough in a way that revealed how much Manila's strategic posture had shifted since President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. came to power in 2022. Rather than staying quiet to avoid antagonizing Beijing, the Marcos administration chose transparency. Every confrontation was filmed, documented, and shared publicly. Every water cannon attack was broadcast on social media before the vessels had even returned to port. This media strategy turned individual maritime incidents into internationally covered stories, building a public record that made it significantly harder for China to deny or minimize what its vessels were doing. The Philippines also deepened its military alliances at a pace that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The annual Balacadan exercises with the United States expanded in scope. Australia, Canada, Japan, France, and New Zealand all increased their presence in Philippine waters through joint patrols, training exercises, and port visits. Exercise Alone 2025, the largest Australian military exercise with the Philippines in history, deployed over 3,600 personnel across 15 days of live-fire drills. Australian Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Raven described it as the largest airlift of Australian combat forces since the 1999 East Timor mission, a comment that underlined just how seriously Canberra had reassessed its strategic priorities in the Indo-Pacific. China's response to this coalition building was to escalate rather than retreat. On September 16, Chinese Coast Guard vessels fired water cannons at Philippine ships near Scarborough Shoal, injuring crew members and drawing fresh diplomatic protests. A week after the October 12 ramming, a Beijing spokesperson told reporters that the Philippines should abandon what it called unrealistic illusions in the South China Sea, language that the United States quickly pushed back against. And just days after the October 12 incident, a Chinese drone was recovered by Philippine authorities in the waters near Palawan, raising alarming questions about the scope of Beijing's underwater surveillance activities inside Philippine territory. These are not isolated incidents. They form a pattern. And what analysts who track the South China Sea closely began to describe by late 2025 was a form of conflict that had evolved well beyond traditional territorial disputes. What the region was experiencing was something they called gray zone warfare, a sustained campaign of physical pressure, legal maneuvers, information operations, and strategic positioning designed to shift facts on the water without crossing the threshold that would trigger a formal military response. The margin between routine patrol and international incident had, as one strategic analysis put it, narrowed to mere meters. Every resupply mission, every Coast Guard transit, every fishing boat operating near a contested feature had become a potential flashpoint. And the world was watching all of it in real time because both Manila and Washington had made a deliberate decision to ensure transparency, flooding social media and international news platforms with footage that China could not suppress or counter effectively. By October 2025, the United States and the Philippines had announced the formation of a joint military task force specifically designed to increase operational coordination in the South China Sea. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and his Philippine counterpart Gilberto Teodoro made the announcement at the sidelines of the ASEAN summit, signaling that the alliance was moving beyond exercises and into something with a more permanent operational structure. The task force was not just a training framework. It was a standing coordination mechanism that could be activated rapidly in response to Chinese actions. China's Coast Guard fleet, meanwhile, continued to grow. By tonnage, China operates the largest Coast Guard in the world. The CCG-3104, the vessel that collided with the Chinese destroyer on August 11, was itself a massive ship. And the construction of new, even larger Coast Guard vessels continued at shipyards across China through 2025. Some of these ships are larger than the destroyers operated by many other nations' navies. They carry water cannons, deck guns, and in some configurations, helicopter landing pads. They are built for presence, for intimidation, and for the kind of gray zone operations that Beijing has perfected over years of careful experimentation. What makes the South China Sea situation so uniquely dangerous is not just the hardware. It is the combination of overlapping legal claims, domestic political pressures on multiple sides, and a physical environment in which vessels from several different nations are now operating in extremely close proximity on a daily basis. One miscalculation, one aggressive helmsman, one moment of poor communication, and an incident that was intended to be coercive could spiral into something far more serious than any side intended. That reality was not lost on Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Maria Teresa Lazaro, who acknowledged in October that Manila and Beijing were engaged in negotiations toward a memorandum of understanding aimed at reducing confrontation at sea. But analysts were quick to note the limits of such a framework. Any agreement between the two sides would address procedures, not the underlying sovereignty claims. And as long as those claims remained unresolved, and as long as China continued to construct and fortify military installations on features that international law recognizes as belonging to the global maritime commons, the pressure points would not disappear. The three defining flashpoints of 2025 told that story clearly. At 2nd Thomas Shoal, where the Philippines has intentionally grounded a rusting naval vessel called the BRP Sierra Madre to maintain a physical presence, resupply missions for the small crew aboard became a near-constant confrontation. At Sabina Shoal, a location that had not previously been a major focal point, Chinese vessels moved in force and water cannon attacks on Filipino fishing boats injured 3 fishermen and caused serious damage to their vessels. And at Scarborough Shoal, China's unilateral declaration of a national nature reserve in the northern portion of the feature, an announcement made in September 2025, was widely condemned as an attempt to codify exclusive control over a fishing ground that international courts had explicitly recognized as traditional fishing territory for multiple nations. The Nature Reserve Declaration was particularly significant because it came in the wake of the August collision. Rather than showing restraint in the aftermath of an incident that had cost its own personnel their lives, Beijing doubled down. It escalated legally at the same moment it was trying to downplay the physical damage. This combination of public aggression and official silence became a hallmark of how China managed its South China Sea strategy throughout the year. The world's response to China's posture in 2025 was measurably different from previous years. The coalition of nations willing to conduct joint exercises in the South China Sea expanded significantly. Australia, Canada, Japan, France, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom all participated in operations with the Philippines at various points during the year. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which links the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, provided a behind-the-scenes layer of coordination that gave Manila situational awareness it could never have generated alone. And the United States reaffirmed repeatedly, in formal diplomatic language and through the physical presence of its naval assets, that its treaty obligations to the Philippines were not conditional on the political temperature of the moment. What does all of this mean for the future of the South China Sea? Every serious analyst who tracks the region has arrived at roughly the same conclusion. The dispute is not moving toward resolution. It is moving toward managed confrontation. The goal, for the nations opposing Chinese expansion, is no longer to reverse what Beijing has already built in the Spratly Islands. That opportunity passed years ago. The goal now is to prevent further expansion, to maintain freedom of navigation through waters that global commerce depends on, and to ensure that the incremental reshaping of maritime facts on the water does not go uncontested. For China, the calculus is different. Beijing believes, with a conviction that does not appear to have been shaken by international court rulings or diplomatic condemnation, that the South China Sea is part of its sovereign territory and that it is simply exercising its rights within that territory. Every foreign naval exercise in the sea is framed as provocation. Every resupply mission by the Philippines to its own personnel is described as an illegal intrusion. And the language coming from Chinese officials in 2025, telling the Philippines to abandon unrealistic illusions, warning against the weaponization of international law, accusing the United States of stirring up confrontation, made clear that Beijing does not see its position as negotiable. That is what makes the South China Sea so dangerous heading into 2026. Not the weapons. Not the ships. Not even the incidents that make global headlines. What makes it dangerous is the gap between what China believes it is entitled to and what the rest of the region, backed by the United States and an expanding coalition of allies, is willing to accept. That gap is not closing. It may, in fact, be widening. And in a sea where naval vessels, Coast Guard ships, and fishing boats are now operating within meters of each other on a daily basis, the distance between a confrontation and a catastrophe has never been shorter. The vessels continue to move through those contested waters every day. The cameras are rolling. The radar systems are tracking. The alliances are holding. And somewhere out in that vast, glittering, deeply contested sea, the next incident is already forming on the horizon.